Reynolds gives one of the most fabulous performances in screen history as Molly Brown. Vital, joyful Molly, America's How to Succeed girl.
Sure, I'm suckered, and I might give out, but I won't give in.
She overcame every obstacle as she rose from rags to riches.
Margaret Molly Brown, though famous for surviving the Titanic tragedy in 1912, accomplished much more throughout her lifetime than suggested by history and Hollywood. A triumphant philanthropist and internationally known public figure, Brown actively participated in many social causes, including women's suffrage and juvenile rights. The rags to riches myth perpetuated by Hollywood is perhaps Molly's greatest tragedy, a misconception of the true Margaret Brown.
And a lot of people over the years have had a mythical look at her, and that being, yes, she was on Titanic, but there's so much more to her that people really don't realize.
Born on July 18, 1867, to Irish Catholic immigrants John Tobin and Joanna Collins in Hannibal, Missouri, Margaret Tobin was one of 5 siblings. Unlike most females at the time, she was formally educated. She attended a grammar school run by her aunt until age 13, when she began to work at a tobacco company. 6 years later, in 1886, Brown left Missouri to join her brother Daniel and half-sister Mary Ann in Leadville, Colorado, a newfound mining town. Later that summer, at the age of 19, she met 32-year-old miner James Joseph j.j. Brown at a Catholic church picnic. Wedding bells tolled that September for the couple. Brown gave birth to her first child, Lawrence, in 1887, and to her second child, Catherine Helen, in 1889. In 1893, J.J. was appointed superintendent of all ibex mining properties, one of which was the Little Johnny Mine. He devised a new method of mining, enabling him to mine deeper and eventually discover gold. The Browns soon became wealthy, and with their newfound riches, decided to move to Denver, Colorado in 1894. The move allowed Brown to become more involved in Denver elite society, travel, and start her philanthropic work. She became a founding member of the Denver Women's Club, a network of organizations that advocated for literacy, education, suffrage, and general human rights. She was known for hosting amazing events to fundraise for causes she cared about, the most successful being Denver's Cathedral of Immaculate Conception and St. Joseph's Hospital. One of her greatest triumphs was her work with Judge Ben Lindsay to help destitute children by establishing the first juvenile court system in the world, a precedent for the United States juvenile court system. Brown even ran for state senate in 1901, which was very uncommon for women at that time and created issues in her marriage to J.J. Though she dropped out before Election Day, Brown continued to be involved in political and social issues. Eventually, tensions in the Browns' marriage grew too large to resolve, and in 1909 they signed a separation agreement in which J.J. funded Brown's lavish lifestyle. Though they never actually divorced, the couple remained separated until J.J.'s death in 1922. Following her separation from J.J., Brown continued to travel and spend time with family. In April of 1912, while traveling with her daughter in Europe and Egypt, Brown received news from her son that her newborn grandson was showing signs of illness. She booked the first available trip home on a new ship called the Titanic. Luckily, Helen stayed behind with friends. Later, in a letter Brown wrote to her daughter, she said, "Well, I am thankful you were not along. Consequently, my hands and mind were free."
She's helping people get into the lifeboats, and then she is dropped into one, and she's given her clothes to help other people. She's getting the women to row, and all of those things are part of the story. But I think what really makes her the heroine is when she gets onto Carpathia, because she had learned to speak 5 languages, so she was able to communicate with a lot of second and third class that nobody else could. She helped start the Titanic Survival Committee. She raised $10,000 before they even got to New York. Once they get to New York, she stays on the ship one more day and continues to help the second and third class. After that, she gets a room at the Ritz-Carlton and stays in New York for a week and continues to help the second and third class.
But she didn't only survive the Titanic. She took the opportunity at that point when they got to New York to make sure that the women who had lost their husbands and had no income, that they would also be taken care of. So she raised a great deal of money. She was clearly always looking out for others.
As chair of the Survivors Committee, she presented a silver loving cup to Captain Rostron of the Carpathia and a medal to each crew member on May 30th, 1912. She went on to help erect the Titanic Memorial in Washington, D.C., and visited Halifax, Nova Scotia to place wreaths on graves of victims. Upon hearing that women were not allowed to testify in the Titanic hearings held by the United States Senate, Brown took action into her own hands. She wrote her own version of the event, a writing she published in newspapers worldwide, including Denver, New York, and Paris.
She was pretty level-headed about it. She kind of said in a quote in a newspaper that she basically just did what anyone else would do. She said, I just jumped in to help because help was needed. And she didn't let this sort of keep her down.
In 1914, 2 years after the tragedy of the Titanic, Brown ran for United States Senate, using her fame as a survivor to aid her run. She used her campaign as a platform to voice her concerns regarding issues that she was passionate about.
I think Margaret Brown was a real pioneer trying to run for the Senate. In the end, she wasn't successful, in part because I think she went to help deal with relief efforts in World War I. And I always thought that actually shows a maturity of judgment, too, the ability to step away from politics and say, I'm needed somewhere else.
In France, Brown worked with the American Committee for Devastated France to help rebuild destroyed areas and assisted French and American soldiers by teaching them Braille and driving ambulances.
She, of course, helped with the Red Cross nursing in World War I, but she drove ambulances for the soldiers. And that was something that they would have been the first ambulances. And Margaret was one of the few women that knew how to drive at the time. And
after World War I, in the age of an artistic renaissance, Brown continued her passion for theater and drama. In Paris and New York, she studied and performed the roles of Sarah Bernhardt, a very famous actress at that time.
And she was always kind of, doing performances and singing and, musical performances too. But that's when she really decided, okay, I'm going to go to New York and I'm going to study Sarah Bernhardt because that was her favorite actress.
Margaret Brown died peacefully at a New York City hotel on October 26, 1932. Following her death, 2 Denver Post reporters, Jean Fowler and Caroline Bancroft, wrote folktales and fictional accounts of her life. The stories became popular and were heard all over the radio in the 40s. In 1960, Richard Morris wrote the smash hit musical The Unsinkable Molly Brown, which created the popular nickname Molly. She had never actually been called this while alive. 4 years later, Debbie Reynolds starred as Molly Brown in the film version of the musical, a romantic comedy portraying Brown as a social climbing hillbilly.
Not with Molly Brown on board. That ship may be down, but not me. I'm unsinkable.
The movie was a large part of the creation of the myth of Molly Brown, an illiterate country girl who never fit into society.
And that she wasn't always accepted by society. She was kind of ostracized because she wasn't doing what proper ladies do. And yet today we all have a lot more freedom because of women like Molly Brown.
Today, Molly Brown is best known as a Titanic survivor, wife of a wealthy miner, and a Denver socialite. The evolution of the character Molly has tragically covered up Brown's real passion for change and equality and many other triumphs she achieved in her lifetime. The real story of Margaret Brown is one that impacted history on both a national and international scale. The change and equality she achieved are still visible today, from the juvenile justice system to the Titanic Memorial. Brown left a long-term impact on societies worldwide through her committed service to people in need, her passion regarding education for all, and her strong belief in equality for women.